watching different leadership styles and really interacting with hundreds of different businesses, have had a unique opportunity to see how leadership impacts the environment and the context of which people either thrive and perform really well, or the opposite, where they're actually stifled, bottlenecked, and don't thrive and don't produce at the level that's possible.
I think that leaders are more responsible for the employee's results than because if an employee doesn't perform, you always can say this and take measures. But if you just observe what this employee is doing and don't do anything as a leader, you are responsible too for that performance.
Yeah, so one of the way I like to think about it is everybody has a relationship with their own responsibility in across every context. We're talking about work here, but this applies to life, family, right? You can apply this to anything because it's a leadership principle. And so we all relate to our own responsibility, but we only actually have influence over that which we're willing to take responsibility for. And so any leader that's trying to point fingers is actually modeling a refusal to accept a measure of responsibility, the exact opposite that they want their team to do. And so really the question is, how as a leader, how as a manager, do I show up to actually sort of co-produce a result with this person, knowing that everybody is different? I like to think about purpose and motivation from three buckets, like who somebody is by design, who somebody is by experience, and who they want to be by intention, because that's really the formation of where intrinsic motivation is tapped into. So
Hi everyone, welcome back to the Improve Work podcast. Today we have Ryan Rigterink on the show. Ryan is a business coach. He helps leaders transform their hiring and simplify employee motivation. He's the owner of Workgaze, a company that created a platform that connects candidates with employers, and of LeadersOps, a company that provides consultancy in finding and leading motivated employees. Sounds very interesting. Welcome, Ryan.
yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. So glad to be here.
Me too. I'm glad that you are here to share with us from your experience and explore ways to increase employee motivation, because this is the topic of our discussion today, employee motivation and leadership. But first, please give us some brief details about your professional background. What roles have you held in the past, and in what industries have you worked?
Yeah, so I've got kind of an eclectic background in terms of industries. I've worked across 4 different industries over my career. Most of that has been in healthcare, but the types of roles that I've been in is business development, training, sales training, a little bit of marketing, definitely management and leadership. I've also been the founder of a couple different companies. I've worked in administrative capacities, operations. So I've worked, kind of wore a lot of different hats and roles over the years. So.
And how did you become a leadership consultant or coach, how you prefer?
Yeah, so one of the things I've done is working in innovation, and which I forgot to mention actually just a second ago. I've worked in creating innovative partnerships in healthcare and launching those programs, and so that's put me in positions to work with different leaders, and over the course of watching different leadership styles and really interacting with hundreds of different businesses, have had a unique opportunity to see how leadership impacts the environment and the context of which people either thrive and perform really well, or the opposite, where they're actually stifled, bottlenecked, and don't thrive and don't produce at the level that's possible. So through that experience, That's what sort of moved me into sort of a role where leadership has been an elevated importance and an area that can make an impact and hopefully help some organizations really elevate not only their leadership but ultimately both the environment and the results they get in their business as well as with their people. So
Mhm. I agree with you. I think that leadership is an important key to a business, and I think that one person can thrive in a work environment and fail in another one. I think this is a common situation for people.
yeah. Well, I mean, we all know that people join companies and they leave managers, right? But we tend to think that performance is very siloed and it's based on the individual, and certainly that's a factor, but it's only one factor. What I like to talk about is that, how somebody performs. Um, is in the exchange that happens. It's actually in the relationship between who their leaders are, their environment, the work, and themselves. And so they are certainly a key component, but it's not the only factor, which is why, if we peel back and think about this from how performance happens, we've all seen people or have been that person that's performed really, really well under one management, and then the management changes and performance goes down, the whole team performance goes down. I mean, we see it all over the place, but we don't always think of it in terms of who's responsible for that, and um, how do we allocate responsibility in that relationship. That's a little It's a little messier to define if it's a shared relationship basis versus just it's easy, maybe a little lazy, to just put it all on the individual, which certainly is a factor, but just not the only one.
Yes, I will relate a little bit about performance reviews when the employees are held accountable for their results, but also how they are lead by their leaders. It's an important factor, and the leaders assess them, but in some way they assess themselves also because the employee results are also reflecting their leadership skills.
Yeah. Yep. There's a great line in a movie, Remember the Titans, where there's two linebackers that are getting into they're mixing it up and getting into kind of an argument and a fight. And one is actually the leader of the team, the captain, and the other one is sort of second in command. And the captain is upset with the other quarterback, or excuse me, the other linebacker, about his attitude, and his response was, "Attitude reflects leadership." And so it was his way of pushing it back onto the captain. But there's an aspect of that in this relationship that it does go both ways, right?
Yes, yes, but being a leader, it puts you in the first role in the first place. So I think that leaders are more responsible for the employee's results than because if an employee doesn't perform, you always can say this and take measures. But if you just observe what this employee is doing and don't do anything as a leader, you are responsible too for that performance.
Yeah, so one of the way I like to think about it is everybody has a relationship with their own responsibility in across every context. We're talking about work here, but this applies to life, family, right? You can apply this to anything because it's a leadership principle. And so
Yeah.
we all relate to our own responsibility, but we only actually have influence over that which we're willing to take responsibility for. And so any leader that's trying to point fingers is actually modeling a refusal to accept a measure of responsibility, the exact opposite that they want their team to do. And so it's one of those things that's counterintuitive. By actually taking greater responsibility, you have greater impact. And then as a leader, modeling accepting responsibility even beyond yourself, is something that we all want people to do, right? It's what I want my team to do. It's what I want my kids to do. It's what like I want people to be responsible for both themselves and then go beyond. And so it's yeah. Sometimes we inadvertently by wanting people to just sort of perform, we end up going against what we actually want to model and sort of organically culture versus the fast push the thumb down and get a quick result kind of thing. So
Yes, I totally agree, and it's very, very well put. Um, okay, so let's dive in our questions, and I will ask you, uh, from your experience, what are the greatest challenges that a leader encounters with their team members? And if you can give us some examples.
so I think one of the greatest challenges is understanding what drives each person. And so it takes a level of intentionality to not just understand the task at hand, but understand the person in the midst of the work that's being done, and to then flex our management style to the individual. And so really the question is how as a leader, how as a manager do I show up to actually sort of co-produce a result with this person, knowing that everybody is different. And so if you think about this in like a parenting context, how I have to show up to each one of my four kids to actually cause thriving, to cultivate the types of things that I want as their father, and to help them thrive and be productive both at work and in life. It's the same principles applied to work, where it's just you can't necessarily just take a cookie cutter approach. There are things that I've done that have worked and are sort of universal, but there's an aspect of leadership that is personalized that I think is a challenge, because it requires a level of inquiry, of curiosity, of service and flexibility to the individual that I think is both the challenge, and it's also part of the joy, in a sense, of really connecting with people in a way that's not transactional, but it's really relational.
Hmm. And how can leaders know their teammates? How they can connect better with them, to know them better and to respond better to their needs in the leadership relationship?
Yeah, so I think starting with a bent towards curiosity, um, I think that's huge. I think as leaders, we like to tell what to do, but questions, I think, are, at least in my leadership career, have been probably one of the most valuable things. It's not necessarily as a leader having the right answer, but sometimes it's way more important to have the right question. And so getting really curious to understand, and I'd say almost a pre-step, or certainly something that goes hand in hand with that, is a suspension of judgment. So each of us, none of us are excluded from this. We see things and we make judgments, right? And so instead of, as a leader, jumping to a conclusion, suspending judgment, at least momentarily, to really genuinely get curious about, okay, why did this happen? And what's actually going on here, versus just a surface level perception. I can make, because I'm compressed for time, and all of us are wanting to move at a pace, because we've got, if you're like me, you've got more on your plate, and you've got more to dos than day, right? And so there's a matter of that tension of prioritizing and moving through things at a quick pace. But when it comes to managing people, we sort of have to regulate ourselves, I think, to suspend judgment and inquire, not only about the person, but about the situation, so that we can understand not just the thing, but what's the context around the thing. And so that's I think is really important for people leadership, but also leading people in the midst of their work, and even throughout change, is really understanding things in a more in-depth way, that then our judgment and our leadership can be on point instead of I've been guilty of this. I make a snap judgment. I think I understand it. And then I give a directive or something like that. And lo and behold, I was missing some important parts of it. And so my directive that I thought was saving time ended up costing me way more time, because then I not only had to go back and readjust the direction, but also then there was, there can be death by a thousand paper cuts relationally, right? Where, you know, you know, we make a
Yes.
snap comment, we do whatever, right? There's an undermining of relational credibility, relational equity, however you want to talk or speak to that or call that. So it ends up taking more time sometimes by going fast. And
Yes.
then just understanding our people, what makes them tick. So, we tend to, as leaders, we tend to want to manage the externals, but really getting into understanding who somebody is from the inside out. I like to think about purpose and motivation from three buckets, like who somebody is by design, who somebody is by experience, and who they want to be by intention, because that's really the formation of where intrinsic motivation is tapped into. So, everybody has a bent of skills and values and talents, and then they have developed those to a certain point and they manage themselves a certain way, but they also have this future that they've got a sense of, at least, if not some clarity on who they want to become and where they want to go, what they want to do. And so in that tension between those two things is where intrinsic motivation can really be understood and tapped into in a way that's not just in a way that's not transactional. It's not manipulative. It's actually genuine about who the person is and how can we make work more meaningful and more motivating to the individual based on really understanding who they are, who they want to become, and how can we help accelerate them towards that in a way that genuinely matters to them.
Um, yes, I think that this is very important. Um, did you observe that entrepreneurs take the time to know their employees and know their intention regarding their professional future, or uh, to know these three elements that you mentioned before? Do you think that they take the time to learn these things about their team members?
I think it's very situational. I think there's entrepreneurs that are probably all across the board, just like leadership in most sectors, where you've got leaders who are more relational. We talk about EQ, right? That are more likely to lean into that versus not. There are a lot of entrepreneurs that are just, I mean, if you're an entrepreneur, it just means you probably have a time scarcity that's higher than other leaders. And so there can be actually a tendency to do less of this. There's also a lot of entrepreneurs that that may or may not have experience leading people. And so as an entrepreneur, that might be the first time an entrepreneur is leading other people. And so that can be a challenge. Just a lack of experience in that is something that shows up. I've talked to a number of like agency owners where they start out and they're doing work and then it grows and they hire people and they're sort of like accidental entrepreneurs where now they own a company and they're leading a team, and they may or may not have actually had any leadership training or led people even in their professional life before that. And so it's very situational. But I'd say if there is a tendency, it's a tendency because of the time pressure or maybe a lack of training and experience to probably do less of that than some others that are at a different point in their career.
Yes, I understand. What would you advise a young, not necessarily a young entrepreneur, but a person who became just recently an entrepreneur and has a team? What would you advise this person to do to gain leadership skills to gain the capabilities necessary to lead people effectively and in a professional way that get results?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of things that people can do. There's lots of great books out there. There's podcasts to listen to like this and others. There's great leadership training. I run a leadership training coaching program that somebody can go through. There's lots of other leadership programs out there. There's if you want to learn, there's not a shortage of places you can go to really learn this. The other thing I think is really helpful is to network with leaders that you want to become like, and just a cup of coffee and a half hour with somebody can really change the trajectory of your leadership. Being intentional to reach out to other leaders, to network with them, and again, just get curious. Like I like to ask questions. I rather learn from somebody else who's been further down the road than me go and step in all the same potholes that somebody else has if I can avoid them, right? So I think getting curious and intentional again pays huge dividends when it comes to leadership. And there's lots of people who are willing to help. I mean, I meet a number of people for coffee and have been on both sides of that. I've been mentored and mentor other leaders, both formally and informally. So that's what I would say is take a posture of humility and curiosity and just seek it out and then find the way that works best for you and don't just do it at one point in time, but try and make it part of your yearly goals. Like how do I want to develop as a leader? Who do I want to become? And that may or may not, I mean, counterintuitively, that may or may not be the highest motivation of that may or may not be for the business. For an entrepreneur, it likely is, but leadership applies to every area of life. And so, I also like to look around me at who's leading certain areas of their life really well and tap into that, right? Because there's so many different dimensions when it comes to leadership and how people show up that I think, you know, I like to learn from lots of different people, and if I can leverage somebody else's strength, and that be the cheat code for accelerating my own growth, then that seems pretty smart to me. So
Yes. Um, if a leader happens to have employees that are not motivated, uh, what these leaders should do to increase their employees' motivation? What steps or what actions can they take to change the situation?
yeah, so it very situational. It depends, on the employee. Was this somebody who wasn't motivated to, like ever in the relationship, or had they been performing at a certain level and now are unmotivated? So it's very situational. But a couple, I think, universal truths is to be upfront in the communication. If for instance, it is somebody who has seems to have lost motivation, then I like to have kind of more upfront conversations, like in a very direct but compassionate way. Like, hey, it seems like you seem a little more disengaged, or like things aren't as interesting or not as motivated, or a little like whatever it is, right? The language can be adjusted to the individual and the situation, but hey, well, like what's going on? Like, is there anything going on that and just start a conversation with an observation and an inquiry on a very human level, because there's oftentimes things going on beyond the work that are affecting how somebody shows up in the work. And that might be an opportunity to build that relationship significantly in the midst of just not calling out not calling out for judgment and for just performance sake, but to genuinely care. Like, hey, it seems like this is going in a direction that isn't necessarily what you might be interested in. Is that the case? Am I misjudging that? What can we do about that? So, I mean, that can turn into supporting somebody outside of work. That can turn into adjusting expectations for a period of time based on a situation. And it could also be a great way to start a career conversation. Like, yeah, I'm really frustrated by X, Y, and Z. I really wanted to do this. So that can really go in a lot of different directions. It can also be they're really frustrated by something going on in the workplace or an aspect of work. And so like it's very situational, but again, a posture of suspending judgment and having direct but empathetic communication on something and finding out why is huge for building the relationship versus just driving performance. And so that's what I would say if somebody has lost motivation. I do think though that as leaders, we are actually our one of our primary responsibility is to create an environment where motivation thrives. And so we can do that on the front end of hiring, and we can do a lot of these in our selection and how we go about hiring. It's one of the things that we're really creating the data for with Workgaze to be able to hire for motivation, engagement, and retention. And so I think some of it's a blind spot and could be a mishire situation that can be avoided. But the other is insights into how somebody ticks. So we've got a motivation fit that really helps leaders to flex their personal leadership style with each individual. But I'd say if it's a motivation that's decreased, then I think as leaders we've got to get real curious and then address it depending on whatever it is. So the second piece of that, sorry, it's a little longer of an answer, but the second piece of that is I think as a leader, we're not only responsible for creating the environment and the context where people thrive and are motivated to produce, but the flip side of that is I think we're also really one of our key responsibilities. How do we remove friction? How do we remove barriers? How do we get things out of people's way so that they can actually do the work at a high level and remove frustration? And so I think both fueling what matters to people, understanding what's going on in the context, and then removing barriers. If we do those three things as a leader, we're going to probably be in the top quartile of leaders if we can do those three things. So, and it matters to people.
Yes, so not being just reacting, but also proactive, because we can have these conversations and find out why that specific employee behave in that way, is disengaged, but also preventing these kinds of behaviors or disengagements by taking away the obstacles that could create frustration and dissatisfaction between employees. But another
Yeah.
question I want to ask you is how a leader can figure out if an employee is not motivated, if this employee is disengaged. Are there some specific behaviors or uh, clues that show this thing?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of the human elements. Obviously, performance tends to go down, right? So that's probably a pretty strong indicator. Although that could also be a reflection of market shifts and changes. It could be it could be a factor of just the quota has changed and maybe the comp is the new target's unattainable or unrealistic based on the formula used. But I'd say generally you can tell if somebody's satisfied or not. Obviously, you can do surveys for engagement. You can do surveys for job satisfaction. You can do all sorts of things to actually get data. But on a real human level, like as a manager or leader, should have a good enough pulse on people to find out and to see and observe how somebody's doing, right? It's powers of observation, I think, here are more important than necessarily a survey. Surveys have value, obviously, but surveys are a trailing indicator, not a leading indicator. And so, if we want to be proactive, it means doing the things as a leader that prevents this from happening, or at least observing it early on, so we can have conversations and flex our leadership style, make adjustments where needed, and really partner with the person in that journey of how well they're doing. So
Mhm. You mentioned earlier that lack of motivation can be caused by hiring process. What are some things a leader should look for when hiring a new person, so he or she knows for sure that this person is motivated by what they can offer to these people?
yeah, so as a backdrop of how hiring is done right now, we tend to hire based on keywords of resume parsing and then qualifications based hiring. And so one of the, I guess, let me set the context from that too. One of the things that I think is problematic and unfortunately the norm of how hiring is done right now is we end up attract or like recruiting the best worst candidates. So what do I mean by that? If somebody matches 100% of the qualifications of a job, we have to think about, okay, what would cause somebody to want to work doing that same exact thing for me?
Right.
Well, what does it boil it down to, right? It boils it down to, okay, well, what more are you going to offer me? It boils down to a higher offer, right? And so physical rewards or monetary rewards are only one of four things that we give insights onto in terms of how somebody is motivated. So by making 100% qualifications the criteria of how we hire, we automatically exclude motivations of being connected, motivations of making an impact in the world, motivations of personal career growth. And some of those can be some of actually more powerful motivators. It depends on the individual. We're obviously very situational of who the person is, what the job is, and what they're looking for. But the truth of it is our hiring practices right now exclude some of what would be our best, most motivated candidates. Because somebody who's wanting to advance in their career, and we offer a job that helps build the skills that helps them navigate towards that and is highly aligned to what they want to do in their career, guess what? They're going to be much more engaged. So I had a conversation with it was a career coaching conversation probably about a year or so ago. And this person was, they had worked in some fast food entry level jobs and was now like looking for some work while going to school. And and I'm like, so what she said was, I don't want to work in fast food. I'll do anything really as a job while I'm in school, but I don't want to work in fast food. I'm like, well, that's interesting. Like, why not? Like, she's like, well, I've just done that. I don't ABC. I don't like it. I'm like, okay, so 3 to 5 years from now, what's your dream end goal career? And she's like, well, I would really love to be a speech pathologist, possibly be a partner in a practice. And I just really love working with kids and would love to do that. I'm like, well, that's amazing. Like that's a phenomenal career. I'm like, so just for conversational sake, like what if I was a manager or an owner of a fast food restaurant, like not just anyone, but what if I told you that, you know, I was willing to work on all the transferable skills that will help you become a partner in a practice. So, like for instance, you need to learn how to communicate with different stakeholders, understand the needs of the audience. You need to be able to document what's going on. You need to be able to work with financial systems. You need to be able to work with all of these different skills that you will need that are actually beyond your degree. Like they're the things around the degree that will make you successful in being a practitioner of that. What if I said I was willing to take not long, like 3 to 5 minutes every week, and we would intentionally work on all of the skills that are needed to be successful in that? Would that be of interest to you? And she literally went from, I don't want to work in fast food to, well, yeah, absolutely. And so that was one of my big aha moments was like, okay, so it's not actually the work that you're opposed to. It's how that work serves the future that you care about that drives your motivation, your engagement, and your desire to do that work. Because it's not just about the task. It's about how does the task serve who somebody wants to become. That's way more powerful of a motivator than just checking boxes and doing tasks. And so that's some of the things that in the hiring process we're trying to introduce. Like, how can we figure out which candidates that we can actually build the most powerful future career growth path with, even if it's an entry level job, it doesn't matter. There's so many transferable skills, knowledge, and ability, which we give insights to both the job seeker and the employer, that if you can layer this into your hiring practices, you can not only identify people that you create more value for in the job, but you create a foundation to partner with people where you're genuinely fueling what drives the person in a way that is way beyond what a resume can do. And so that's part of what I think is the future of hiring, but it's also the future of people leadership, where we can partner in a much more authentic human way that work actually serves a greater purpose and a higher benefit for both the individual as well as the organization.
Yes, so not only asking for their qualifications and experience, but also investigating their career plans and what they want to do in the future. Yes, I think that this is a great point, and it will help to choose those candidates who could be motivated by what you can offer them in your company. Ryan, thank you very much for your answers and for sharing your experience and knowledge with us. Please tell us what is the way that people can best connect with you.
Yeah, so really two different websites. The leadership coaching and training is you can go to leadersops.com. So it's leaders plural ops.com. And if you're interested in being a part of either a job seeker or a leader who's involved with hiring, whether that's a recruiter or hiring manager or field manager, you can go to workgaze.com. And we're actually launching the job seeker side in the well, probably will be live by the time this broadcast is released, and then we're currently working with employers to roll out the private beta of the employer side as well. So
Yes, I will put the link in the show description. Ryan, thank you very much for being here, and I wish you all the best,
thank,
especially because we are at the end of this year, and I think that the next year will bring you many successes and achievements.
well, I appreciate that. Thank you so much for having me. It was been a real pleasure to talk to you. So thanks for having me.